Good evening, everyone. It is Wednesday, and it is June 4th. Clock is ticking, the days are going by, and Jesus is coming. Ready or not, here I come. So I hope you can tune in over the next 8 weeks for these shorts, because we're going to be covering the 7 feast days and then culminating and summarizing it in the 8th week. So for the next 8 weeks, we're going to talk about how the feast days play into Jesus, our Messiah, and how and what he does and when he does it. Because if you look at his first coming, we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to take them in order. First one, and we're going to do the 4 spring feasts first. So over the next 4 weeks, we'll do those. So we're going to get started with Pesach, or we call it Passover. Or we call it Easter, which is about as pagan as you can get. But anyway. Leviticus 23, Passover. These are the appointed feast days of Adonai. And where they're first mentioned, if you go to Genesis chapter 1, I think it's verse 16. And it says, I created I separated the day and the night. That's what one thing was for why he created this light. And then he said, I did it for signs. Because in Judaism, in the old days, they didn't have calendars. So they traveled by stars and they read the stars. And matter of fact, the 12 solar systems are all have symbols of what represent that each one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So, and then the third reason that he separated was so that he could give signs for God's appointed time, or Moedim. It's translated in our English Bible very inaccurately. It's translated as seasons, but in Hebrew it's the word Moed or Moedim, which means God's appointed times, a special day that He wants to talk to people, or special days in some cases. So we're going to talk about Passover first. These are the appointed feasts of Adonai. During the first month, on the 14th day of the month, in the evening, is Adonai's Passover. Isaac's descendants, known as the people of Israel, eventually wound up in Egypt, where they were enslaved. The time then came, and God decided to free them from their cruel taskmasters and take them back to the land that he had promised them so many years before. Now, this Passover obviously is a representation of Jesus, but it's a covenant. It's a promise. He's saying, God can't go back on his word. We can break it, but he can't. Leviticus 23 again, on Passover. The Passover Seder, and Jesus would have had this, but they only show 4 cups here, and there were actually 5. You see the matzah bread, which is unleavened bread, which we use for our communion, which represents Passover. If you see the brown streaks in it, it's cooked in a way that the Jews don't even realize it, but those lines represent his stripes on his back. And then on each, there's indentations. It's almost like a Ruffles have ridges potato chip, and on the top of the ridges they have pinpricks all the way down, and so not only do you have the stripes, but you also have the piercing of the side. So and then you've got the egg, which represents new birth in a Jewish Passover, and then you've got the horseradish over to the left, which horseradish is the bitter herbs that they would dip into the with the bread on the second cup of Passover. They would dip in and get the bitter herbs, which was to remind them of their 40 years of struggle in the Sinai. Then you can see that the 4 cups, and there's, like I say, there's 5. The first one represents when they were leaving Egypt, and it was to represent them separating or consecrating themselves and separating themselves from the world. And Egypt represents the world in this case. Then they get to the Sinai, they cross the Red Sea, get into the desert area. And the next cup represents that's the one that Jesus said, whoever dips into the cup. Because the first one they would drink the wine with the meal, with the lamb. The second one, they would dip the bread into the bitter herbs, and then they would sip the cup. This is where Jesus said, go and do what you're going to do and do it quickly, because he knew what Judas was going to do, and Judas could not take part in the third cup, because the first cup, consecration, second cup, affliction, third cup, redemption. And there was no redemption for Judas. He never asked for it. Had he asked for it, he would have gotten it, but he didn't ask. And then the fourth cup is the one that Jesus held up. And when he held it up, he said, I will not drink of this cup until I see you again in the kingdom, which is the time we are about to come up with after the rapture during the 7 years. That is the 7 days of a wedding where we, the bride, are meeting our bridegroom, and we're having a wedding supper of the Lamb, which is a feast. And that fourth cup represents consummation. Obviously not consummating like a husband and wife here on earth would, but that's what the fourth cup is, consummation. And then there would be a fifth cup, and it's not shown here. Typically it would be put upside down and never filled, because that's the one that they hold. They're holding on to what is in Malachi, that I shall send Elijah in that great and terrible day. So they're waiting for Elijah. And when they sit down at Passover, they have a clean plate, a cup that is upside down in front of that plate, and silverware, because it's there in case Elijah comes and knocks on their door. But that's the fifth cup, and it doesn't appear here. So you got the matzah bread, the stripes, and the piercing representing what happened to Jesus. The egg, new birth, which is the purpose for his death. And then there were 5 cups of wine. I hope that made sense to you. I would love it if you can share these web pages with other people. The more people we can get listening, because I'll tell you what, Jesus could come this fall, or he could come next fall. He will come in the fall. I'm convinced of that. And he will come on Yom Teruah, as we've talked about before, the 2 days of what is commonly known as Rosh Hashanah. Bad name, not good sound Hebrew doctrine, but Yom Teruah is. Everyone have a good evening, and hopefully you can tune in again next week. Talk to you soon.